This is a Eureka Whirlwind. This is the wide track model. I just picked this up the other day. It's not the highest end model, but it's one of the higher end models since it has a headlight and a Hepa filter, as well as the wide track feature. The lower end models had a low profile, and many of them didn't have a headlight and a Hepa filter. If they didn't have a Hepa filter, they just had a cloth filter in the back for the exhaust. Was never the biggest fan of these. By this age of the machine, most of the ones that I see nowadays, their motors are coated with dust and their bearings sound horrible because the cyclone design is very inefficient on these. It's only a single cyclone. There's a cyclone right there. It passes a lot of dust onto the two pre-motor filters. They're not as bad as if you maintain them, but most people don't, and that's why you don't see a lot of these in good working order anymore. So fortunately, this one is actually still in very good working order. I'm surprised how well the motor works. I'm gonna guess maybe it just hadn't been used a lot in the last few years. It's missing the dusting brush too, but the other attachments are still on the back of it. This is the second Bagless Eureka ever to be on the US market. These were designed primarily to compete with Phantoms, as when this vacuum was new. Originally, Phantom was one of the only bagless vacuums on the US market. The first Bagless Eureka, the first Whirlwind model, was actually made to be sold in vacuum cleaner stores, and those are very rare. They did not sell them for very long. They didn't sell very well either. Why? I heard that they got clogged up very fast just because this particular design of cyclone is not very effective, and it does pass a lot of dust onto the filters. So it's a rather mundane bagless collection system. However, Phantom was really coming to popularity so fast that Eureka, perhaps really was in a bind and wanted to just quickly cobble together a bagless vacuum just so that they could compete with Phantom. And this is why you saw this machine, because this vacuum is essentially a Eureka victory, which started life as a bagged vacuum. But essentially they just made a couple minor cosmetic changes in order to configure the bagless collection assembly to fit onto the housing of the machine. So it was a rather botched effort to get a bagless vacuum to market, but they were relatively successful. I mean, these vacuums were cheaper than Phantoms on the market, and at the time they sold a lot of them. Like I said, you don't see a lot of them anymore, but yeah, I mean, this machine's almost 20 years old, at least from what I can tell in the serial number. It was made in 2002, which was about the middle of the line for this machine, because this particular design of Eureka Whirlwind came out probably around 98 or 99, and they made these till probably about 05. And I'm not the biggest fan of them. They clean well enough, but they're not super effective. I think a lot of it comes down to the motor. Eureka Victories were never very powerful vacuums for the most part. A couple of the higher end ones, I think they put a little bit more powerful motors in, but these ones in particular never seemed very powerful to me. Water lift, they probably only have about 50 or 60 inches of water lift, which is, I'd say, about average or maybe even a little below average by modern standards. Comparing it to the standards of the time, it might have been good enough, since Phantoms also didn't have a lot of suction through the hose. Hoover also kind of cobbled together a bagless vacuum with the twin chamber. That was their first real bagless vacuum on the US market. It was basically a Hoover Elite with a dust cup screwed onto the housing instead of having a bag, a paper disposable bag assembly. Those also weren't the greatest either. They cleaned carpet well, but they had very little suction through the hose. That's primarily due to the fact that they were a direct air motor. This one is clean air though. But yeah, other than that, I probably am gonna resell it. Admittedly, that's really the reason why I caught it. But I thought it'd be interesting to make a video of it because you don't see too many of these anymore, at least in good working order. Most of the ones that I see, at least on YouTube, all of their motors are generally on their way out, but this one actually still sounds pretty smooth. The Bagless collection assembly, I'll do a quick overview of that. So there's the single cyclone. You can see there's some crap in there already. There's, I don't even know what you call that, the cage, or it kind of acts as a shroud, but I've noticed that crap gets stuck to the top of that. You have this foam filter in the back here that I just washed. There's another foam filter inside that collection chamber right here. And this is where you would normally see a bag if this were still a bagless vacuum, but you can see the cyclone, top of the cyclone's right there. Actually part of this gasket's coming apart, so I should probably get some hot glue to glue that back together, just because that will leak some air and dust out if I don't do that. It has a stretch hose, so the hose is good enough as far as length goes. This is a Hepa filter. Nothing against the Hepa filter itself. This is actually a very substantial Hepa filter. There's a rubber gasket on the side, and I'm gonna guess this filter was probably replaced at some point in this machine's life because it's still in very good shape. This was very dusty, so I kind of cleaned this off, but it just goes to show you how inefficient the cyclones are on this machine. Or I should say cyclone, because there's only one. Yeah. And like I said, they clean well enough. I just gotta get this back into place. They clean well enough. The brush roll, I'll turn it over quick. The brush roll is pretty decent. The brushes are really stiff, so carpet cleaning, it's all right. I mean, the brush roll is effective. It's really just the fact that it has pretty low airflow that it's only so-so on carpet. So I put it cleaning wise on carpet probably about on the level of, like, say, a Phantom Fury. So okay, but not great. They designed this handle to be ergonomic, so maybe that's one plus. Yeah, and new, this vacuum is probably about $150, so not the cheapest, not the most expensive. Again, this vacuum was designed primarily to compete with Phantoms. In some ways they were better, in some ways they were worse. As far as it being better, in any way it might be better than a Phantom. They certainly sold them for quite a bit longer, so they'd be easier to find parts for, at least at the time. Build quality, they're pretty good. The build quality, this is the one thing about even older bagless vacuums, is that this was a time when even a lot of cheaper vacuums were still relatively well made, so build quality, I never really had an issue with that in regards to these machines. But that aside, I think I'll do a quick test of it just so you guys can see it running. Yeah, there's that little release button at the bottom. The brush roll doesn't turn off, which again, there weren't many bagless vacuums at the time that had that feature. Yeah, there's the switch on the side here. But yeah, we'll give it a quick run and see how it works. is the Eureka Whirlwind. Again, this was a very early bagless design by Eureka. By modern standards, they're outdated. By the standards of about 20 years ago, I guess I'd say they were all right. But you really had to be on top of maintaining the machine for it to really last. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed the video.